Wow, it's an impressive, introductions from everyone on the panel, and it's an impressive amount of work and dedication from so many agencies and so many constituents here to make this program and not only this event alive. So I thank you all for your commitments and your continuous effort on this. I'll start my presentation with a comment on why medieval Cairo, or why Islamic Cairo in specific. The title includes Islamic Cairo here. I use medieval Cairo there, but my project is a little bit ambitious, and I don't know where to stop exactly. So I want it to be everything, but I want to concentrate on something to start with. So I'm starting with the Islamic section of medieval Cairo, but looking forward to include more of other monuments and other historical values to the project as well. So my project started the seed for the project started in 2010. 2010, I brought with a colleague of mine 28 honor students from the Pennsylvania State Systems of Higher Education. Basically two honor students from each of the 14 state universities throughout Pennsylvania. My colleague was an anthropologist. I was affiliated with the geography department at that time. So the aim of the project was to actually unveil a portion of history of Egypt that too many people in the West do not know anything about. When we first grouped those 28 students in Clarion, we asked them, what do you know about Egypt? And their first comment was a typical one: the pyramids and the camels, which is a misconception of whatever is going in Egypt. So our first thing to tell them that this class that we're going to work with is going to be concentrating on something that affects contemporary Egypt, what people live in on a daily basis these days. So we took them into a journey. Of course, we visited the pyramids, so they don't say that they came to Egypt without seeing the pyramids. So they visited the pyramids, they interacted with people around the pyramid areas and so on, and we took them to the historical district of Cairo, from the Coptic Cairo, Amr ibn al-As Mosque, all of the old Egypt, Fustat, and the area surrounding it. They visited this area, and we worked our way up to the Fatimid Cairo throughout the gates and the northern gate of Cairo. Visiting every day something different, interacting with people. So imagine we had 28 students plus chaperones, so we were about 35 Americans basically roaming the streets of Cairo, not only the Mu'izz Street, but all the Gamaleya, around Gamaleya streets, the Suq al-Silah, and streets that were never or very rarely visited by tourists. And we were like 35 people walking the streets of those old Egypt, interacting with people, vendors, interacting with regular street shoppers and so on. So we talked with everybody. We rarely ate a hamburger, so we just stuck to koshari and fool and falafel and all of this authentic Egyptian stuff as much as we can, so they can live the Egyptian experience as much as possible. And it was part of their anthropology study, but also my area was the geographic information systems. So I wanted them to collect as much information as they can about each of the monuments that they see and they are impressed with during their visits, reading a little bit about each of the monuments and so on. So they visited multiple places and they gathered information. And then by the end of the class, I asked from them to actually put things on a map. So their backgrounds are different. They are not geographers. They are coming from diverse fields. So what they did is they used Google Earth, basically, to work with, and Google Maps at that time. In 2010, the technology wasn't that great, but they managed to put things together on Google Earth maps. And my project actually started from this point. I told myself, well, it was almost impossible for us to see this amount of monuments of the Islamic history and medieval history of Cairo without the tour guide that we had. Otherwise, we would have been lost in the streets. So we need something. We need a map. And those maps exist in literatures and books and stuff like that. But they do not exist for regular people like regular Egyptians or regular tourists, any visitors to those areas. So they are missing in this perspective. So what I had in mind is that to put this online and make an interactive atlas for people to use on a daily basis whenever they visit the location there. So just to give you a quick historical background of what Islamic history means in Egypt might not be the same when you travel somewhere else in the world. And this map here, or table, shows the different years from 600 to 1900s. And every one of those colored blocks is one of those dynasties, Islamic dynasties. Vertically here, it's each of those countries that were at one point occupied by an Islamic dynasty of somehow. And you will find Egypt in the fifth row here, which started by the Umayyad period and then followed by the Abbasid period. During the Abbasid period, there was a couple of different downfalls and so on, and then followed by the Fatimid period, then Ayyubid, then the Mamluk, and the Mamluk you have divided into two dynasties, and then the Ottoman Empire, and then the Muhammad Ali. It's not the same pattern if you travel up to North Africa. It's a little bit different. When you travel a little bit in Asia, it's a little bit different, and so on. So every periods are going to be overlapping each other depending on how those dynasties sustained during this time. So what I did is I started gathering those monuments or the remainings of each of those dynasties and mapping them. In Egypt, in Cairo in specific, you will find a surge of monuments and architectural values, with the architectural values and historical values, during the Mamluk period and going forward. Before that, there were like very sporadic interest in Cairo in specific as in the Islamic dynasties. Down there, you will find a graph, a bar that shows in details each of those dynasties, starting with the during the Rashidun or Khulafa Rashidun period, which lasted only 20 years. Then the Umayyad period, which lasted about 25. Then 120 years of Abbasid, the Dawla al-Abbasiyya. And then during the Abbasid period, there was the Tulunid period, and the Ikhshidid period, and then the Abbas period came again, and so on. After the Ikhshidid period, the empire, Muslim empire there became weak, and the Fatimids invaded Egypt. And they were actually the first to consider Cairo as their capital. And that's where they started giving attention more to architecture and enriching the urban planning of the city, actually built a whole new city north of the older one and so on, surrounded it with walls and so on. And so on and so forth during the different dynasties during the Islamic period until the current time. So my main questions were, how do we contribute to the enabling this knowledge, enabling this type of wealth of information to people, not only to regular visitors of the area, but also to researchers. The information that I'm going to present today exists all the time. So if you want to search for this information, you will find them. But probably it's going to take you a few days, probably a few months, to find them in scattered sources of information, either books, maps, and so on and so forth. So how do we contribute in increasing this type of awareness by enabling this type of information and making it available online? Then comes a little bit more technical issues. How do we optimize the design for public access, for researchers? And during this process, we need input from people, so how we can actually do a quality control of the input and the background processing of the information and so on. So basically, what are the requirements in general, the data that we need, either spatial or space-related geographic data, or non-spatial, like textual information, multimedia information, and so on about the monuments that we search. The tools that I use are the tools that I specialize in, the geographic information systems or geospatial technologies. Geographic information systems, for whoever didn't hear about it before, is basically digital maps. Okay, simply put, digital maps. There are a lot more into it than just the word digital maps, and many of the GIS professionals hate describing this field as digital maps. But I think it's the closest to the public. If you open your map and use, I came here, for example, using Uber. Okay, Uber uses this mapping technology. It's about location of the client, location of the driver, and how they connect them to each other. Behind the scenes, there is a map, there is a database, and they are connecting it together, the map and the database. So geographic information systems is basically the marriage between geography as space and locations and so on, and the information systems field, which is databases, basically databases and database management and so on. So I use one of those world-leading technologies of GIS, which is called ArcGIS software and software packages. They have different desktop packages as well as online servers and so on. The vision of, I'm not going to go too technical with my presentation, and I'll try to go through the demonstrations part more in a moment here. But the whole idea is to store the information behind the scenes, allow data collection from either casual visitors or researchers and so on, evaluate those data sets and represent this output at the end as a web-based or maps and so on. So the data that I used to collect, that I used for this project, was based on multiple books. One of them is the Islamic Monuments in Cairo, the practical guide by Carolyn Williams, by the AUC Press. She did a great job, and I used this book actually in 2010 class that I taught here. So the students who visited those streets of Cairo had the book with them all the time. It included multiple maps in the appendix. The maps looked exactly like that. This is a snapshot of the maps. They are basically sketches. They are not referenced to the exact location. The maps are really basically sketches. They are hand-drawn and put on the book. I took those maps, stitched them together in order to create this bigger map here and put it on an aerial photograph and try to figure out where are those monuments, their names, and so on and so forth. Going back and forth to the text, trying to get as much information as I can for each of those blackened monuments or polygons here. Another source of information that I'm currently actually using to update those maps and refine them is the Monuments of Historic Cairo. It's a descriptive catalog done by Nicholas Warner, again, American University Press. He created those maps from different sources, including the previous book that I mentioned, but also used other maps, historical maps of 1948 and so on. And he went beyond that, creating the map, and created the floor plans, actually inserted the floor plans of each of the known monuments in the historical district of Cairo. Again, this map is stitched together, and I use this map to clean up my data set and so on. Finally, the 1948 survey maps, which basically when you zoom into the map, it's very crowded. It's very hard to read, but it has almost all of the information that you need for Egypt. And it's almost impossible to distribute this to a tourist or somebody who's interested in visiting the location. Finally, another book, The Art and Architecture of Islamic Cairo, by Richard Yeomans. He included the floor plans of some of those monuments and the explanation of the artistic values of each of the monuments and each of the components of architectural components of each of the monuments and so on. And I use those floor plans as well in my maps. ArcNet.org is a very good source for information. SketchUp 3D is another source, although I'm still debating whether I'm going to include the detailed representation of the buildings in 3-dimensional or not, depending on the processing power that I have for the computers and so on. So I created a database for the monuments, the street blocks, building footprints, some floor plans. I did put online some maps as a test of how things will go and so on. And in the past, I did publish a map about Cairo, about a trip that I visited in Cairo here in 2012, a trip I made, and I traced my route throughout this historical district and what I saw. And as a hobby of mine is photography, so I started taking photos of different monuments and document those locations based on the route that I took in Islamic Cairo. Let me skip this slide here, but I produced those types of maps where you can have you can print them if you want to, but it's I feel like it's kind of a duplication of different efforts that have been done. But with the database that we have, we can produce different maps from the same database. Like, for example, here, we can classify it by dynasty, and each of the eras can be given a different color code, and you can actually look at monuments of different ages and different dynasties on the map. The previous one, you can plot the labels of the monuments, their numbers, and any type of information that you need on the map. I also included some floor plan as an example of Al-Azhar Mosque as a test of a pilot study of how we can build a database and geographic information systems about a floor plan and what type of information that we can store in the floor plan as well. I also included some, I'm not going to show this today, but some of those older maps of visions of how Fatimid Cairo looked before. Some sketches of those maps we can actually what we call geo-reference. We can put them on the referenced location in the real life, so we can preview those maps that exist on books and so on their actual location and compare what they used to be and how they look like today, or the urban fabric look like today, and so on. The outcomes so far, I did in 2012, I did a poster presentation in one of the large GIS conferences in the US. I presented the map of the trip that we did in 2010 with the students involved in, what type of monuments we visited, and so on and so forth. And in 2012, I also created a web-based application that, that shows the trip that I made in 2012. I did a quick introduction about the background of the trip and so on, and then this this takes you path by path, a small route by route, starting from Al-Azhar Street up to Al-Mu'izz Street, and then will take you by monument, each monument. You can click on it, and it will open up the database for you. And you can get the basic information, basically the name of the place, the type of the place that you're visiting, the dates, whether it's in Hijri or Gregorian, the era that belongs to, and any type of information that we can store in the database with, together with photos and so on, where you can see this information. This map is interactive, so you can actually pan, zoom, and click on objects if you want to, and discover all the places that you can visit in the area, or follow the lead here and read the information about each of those monuments and click on it and preview the location of the monument that we're talking about in here. And it takes you one route, one section by one section throughout the street, goes up to the Al-Hakim Mosque, and going out the gates, going back in the other route, looking at different monuments, opening photos if you like to, go back, and so on and so forth. So the seamless representation of the database, the geographic database of those monuments and so on, it exists in this app here. So this was 2012, and I started working on this project multiple times, on and off, and so on, until I got here in late September. From late September, I started researching those other sources of information, because I was working with basic information and so on, and I found a couple of books, and I found a couple of people actually in group who work in this, and I started to collaborate with them and enrich the database a little bit more. Using my software, I could store the information that I need, and the basic functions that we have, we can expose the whole database for us, okay? All of the information that is stored in here. But also I can zoom in to certain locations, like Al-Azhar, and then the floor plan of the Al-Azhar will show up, showing up other databases that are that can store different information about when it was built, who built this section, because every building can have multiple successions of different dynasties actually working and building different components of it. This type of information system can store up to the database of walls. So if you have a specific wall with a specific inscription, and this is what I'm thinking about doing right now, looking at inscriptions, specific inscriptions, add photos for each of the walls, so you can actually have an encounter of the artistic and the representation of calligraphies of different parts of those monuments and so on. Taking this a little bit further, we created a 3D representation scene of just the blocks of this area, where you can actually view the area in 3 dimensions. This is Al Muizz Street. This is Al Azhar Mosque and Al Azhar Complex. And you can actually work your way up the street. And it's the same thing. You have different databases. It drags information from the same exact database that I'm working with all the time, and so on. So taking this a step even further, we go to the online and create what we call those apps, and try to make it as easy as possible, because what I showed you is the guts of the database, everything. But for regular users who are going to be visiting the sites, would like it a little bit more simpler. So if you're looking for all the houses, it will click on the houses, and it will highlight those houses for you all over the map. So you can actually zoom in and preview the locations of those houses, or go through them here and pick a specific house to view the information for. Same thing with the same technology. You can grab the information for mosques. So if you click on the mosques, it's going to basically clear up this selection and select all kinds of mosques in the area. You can create what we call the sabil, all the sabil in the area. So it will tell you that we got 48 found during the area here. And the same function, you can browse through them here, click on one, go to it, or preview where it is. Also, this app here you can customize your search. So if you would like to search any other monument with any other type of monument, I don't know if we have any palaces here. Here's some palaces, for example. Okay, and you can click on it and preview it. So the same function exists. My aim is to actually try to make this as user-friendly as possible. This is an example of what can be done, but I'm going to look at what actually, when you go on the streets, what type of information do you need? And if you are a researcher in this area, what type of information you need to retrieve, and what type of functions do you need in your app in order to retrieve this information, save it, store it, and use it in your research later on. So this is basically what I've done. I've done test posting of the 3D model that I built and so on. Looking forward to enriching this database a little bit more, looking at the design of those websites and those interactive atlases. I don't think it's going to be only one app online. It's going to be multiple apps linking to each other, and a website probably that gives an introduction about the whole project. Hopefully that this I would have the time and the effort to do it in the coming months. Thank you.